Twitters.
We're now live.
Nice. There it is.
We're doing it live. We're doing it live.
Awesome.
All right. Hi, and welcome to The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist. This is the Leftist panel. The very first one that I'm doing. Hopefully I will do more in the future. But we're going to be talking about left unity. We are one person short of our panel, our full panel, but I suspect he'll show up eventually. So I guess we might as well start with everybody introducing themselves and kind of, I guess, letting us know what your political leftist tendency is. Starting with Anark.
Would you like us to state our position in the debate as well?
Yes, let's do that.
All right. Yeah, so you can call me Anark on Twitter. I'm Daniel Barryon. I am an anarchist, and my position is that left unity is not a strategically useful position to have, and that it only has very limited tactical viability either.
Okay, and on to some random geek.
Yes, Cory just needs someone out of his Rolodex, so he just finds some random geek on the internet, and so here I am. And clearly with the Sailor Moon sweater and the RGT2 bullet. Hi, I'm some random geek. I'm a narco-syndicalist and a communist, and my position, I'm also on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube as some random geek, blah, blah, blah. My position on left unity, what the hell is it? Because most of the times I hear the calls and the cries for left unity is usually from like some, not all, some authoritarian leftists who are called Stalinists, as it were, or tankies, that like is like when they get called out for bigotry, like being against sex work or something like that, this is like no, this is why the left is eating itself, as it were, or and this happened on my friend's Facebook page, Anarchist Memes. When you criticize your Soviet Union architecture, no, that didn't really happen. That upset some like Stalinists there. So, and I think honestly that like we don't need unified as a whole body, as it were, because if there's people who try for left unity, what about bottom unity? And that's not the unity between like bottoms between top switch and bottoms, because like I did have to clarify that question when I asked a friend of mine, a comrade of mine, about like that statement as well. But like, so if left unity is a thing, is bottom unity a thing? That's my position.
All right, on to Justin.
Hi, my name is Justin Clark, and I am a Marxist-Leninist. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I'm the co-host of Red Reviews with Cory. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Cory, for organizing this. And so in terms of like the short answer to me is somewhere pretty much is actually fairly close to Anark's position, which is that I think that there are very specific short-term things in which left unity, I think, is a good thing in terms of meeting reasonable goals that actually might change the material conditions in people's lives for the better. But I think in the long term, I don't know if a left unity is viable within the sort of framework of different sort of not competing, but sort of contrasting political tendencies.
Okay, and on to Janus.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. I would term myself as just a socialist or non-sectarian Marxist. In terms of left unity, I strongly believe in left unity. I think it's absolutely necessary. I know a lot of people have disagreements with that, but I just feel that, you know, if everybody just works together and puts their heads together, I think that's the best way forward. Just because, you know, with recent events, in current events, you see like conflicts overseas, and it just seems like the right wing is getting so powerful that we have no other choice. But obviously there's contradictions within that. So yeah, that's me. Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. Oh, and here we go. Here's our other panelist.
Just in time.
Just in time.
Oh, Ben's here. Okay, now it's official. Now it's official. I see.
How's it going, Ben?
Let's try now.
I think I can hear you.
A
Yeah.
little bit of lag, but yes, yes.
Audio default. Why is that?
That's always how it goes. There's always that little bit of glitching on a live stream.
And with the pandemic, all of us have probably done Zoom calls, so it's almost like a seance at the family gathering. And Another, are you there? Another.
I guess while Ben is getting set up, I'm the host, Cory. A lot of people might not actually know me. I consider myself an anarcho-communist, and I actually have no idea. I'm more like some random geek where I have no idea what left unity is. I do see places where we can combine forces on things where it's like in union activism, anti-racism, stuff like that. But if there's places where we diverge, then we're going to have to figure out other strategies. So I guess what's left is for Ben to just introduce yourself and tell us what your tendency is and where your stance is on left unity.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, and sorry about the tech issues.
No worries.
Yeah, my name is Ben Burgis. I am a columnist for Jacobin Magazine, which I guess pretty much says where I stand. I mean, I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and not uncritical of it, but I'm a member of it. So I think that's that's where I'm located as far as the left goes.
And how about your stance on left unity?
Left unity, right? I think that it's obviously good for people to work together on things that they agree on, and to not sort of make a fetish of things that might not be like coming up in the sort of class struggle as it actually exists in 2022. That might be like sort of more theoretical or farther down the line differences. All that makes sense to me. I would say though that I think that it could be a mistake to sort of see left unity as possibly more important than it actually is, because I would just urge people to remember that whenever we're talking about that, we're talking about unity among a very small group of people. When it comes down to it, right? That it's a bigger group of people than it was in 2015, but it's still a very small group of people, and that the thing that's most important is finding ways to appeal to and mobilize the vast number of people who are not part of the left in any sense right now. And so to the extent that to the extent that the oars are all rowing in the same direction on both, right, that you could do something like you're trying to unionize Starbucks, or you're like protesting against a military intervention or something that leftists can generally get together on, and that it's something that's sort of could also broaden the tent, then yeah, for sure, we should do that. But also I think that leftists have a bad habit of like kind of spending their time with each other, thrashing out their 300 points of unity and 600 points of disagreement, and sort of forgetting that that like whether you have when you have a very small club, right, like that sort of achieving unity within the club is not necessarily the most important thing as compared to taking it from being a small club to to reaching out to like a broad mass of people.
There doesn't seem to be as much disagreement among the panel as I expected there to be.
I'm a little surprised too, actually.
I was actually going to say, I was like, oh, are we having a debate, or is this just a discussion? Or
I prefer it to be a discussion too, because like I have my notes, but yeah.
I think that's a great thing.
I didn't really get in more deeply into. I was very, very short, so maybe my position will stir up some discussion here, but my position is that I'm personally against big tent organizations or big tent organizing in a general sense. I don't think that it is effective in a revolutionary sense. It might be good for, like, say, electoral politics or something. I do not think that authoritarian and libertarian socialist organizations should plan or coordinate together. I think that they will inevitably step on each other's toes, and that they have different strategic goals that are at odds with one another. And I think that even tactical cooperation has a pretty fraught history between the two, to where even when they find tactical goals they can agree on, sometimes that backfires enormously. I guess what it really boils down to is that I think the theoretical differences are actually so enormously different that you arrive upon enormous strategic differences, which are nearly irreconcilable between the two, broad groupings of authoritarian left and libertarian left.
What does that mean to you? Like authoritarian left and libertarian left? Because like I guess my sort of first associations, right, with those words would be that we're talking about, I don't know what, like Tank is an anarchist or something, but like, and those are both, I mean, all due respect, right? Those are neither of them mass movements exactly, right? Like and those are both like very small minorities, even among people who generally consider themselves to be leftists or who would call themselves socialists or anything like that. So I wonder if, I wonder if I'm quite kind of getting the way that you're using those phrases.
Yeah. I'll clarify what I mean by that, because that's often where this all begins, isn't it? This is the discussion that often kicks this all off. So, by libertarian socialist, I do not only mean anarchists. I would say that definitely includes like Marxist autonomists, a lot of council communists, neo-Zapatismo, communalism, a la like democratic confederalism and Rojava, things like that. I would also say are libertarian socialist. By authoritarian and libertarian, really what I'm discussing here is the degree to which they think you should be using hierarchical power structures. Pretty much everybody within the libertarian socialist tradition has a opposition to hierarchical power structures. And insofar as that they pop up, it is incidental, or you might say accidental. It's something that they're trying to avoid, which has happened because of circumstance. Whereas authoritarian leftism actually seeks out hierarchical power structures and seeks to utilize them in their praxis, and even in their really rather long-term strategic goals.
I think that's a great point. I guess to offer a counterpoint, I see that sort of struggle as one that's very contentious online, but in the real world, talking with people face to face, like I'm friends with anarchists, I'm friends with people of all sorts of political stripes on the left. And I think that getting bogged down in these dichotomies and these dualistic thinking can, be good when trying to examine an issue, but can also, I think we have to look outside the box. Like myself, sorry, I forgot to say in the introduction, I'm affiliated with the Democratic Socialists of Canada. And while I somewhat think that electoralism can be used as a tool, I don't think that it's the singular thing. So I think I see the benefit in a big tent group. Like I think back to the old SPD of Germany, and they obviously had their problems after 1910, World War I, obviously. But the way that they built their party, I think, is just awesome. They just appeal to so many people of a socialist stripe, and were able to become the biggest party in Germany. Obviously, conditions are extremely different, but I guess my way of thinking is that just the way that the world is now, we got to work together despite our differences. Agree to disagree, I guess.
Well, I'm going to jump in, and it's like when and doing organizing or practice, and I'll speak to myself that like I only been to 2 DSA meetings, and I'm a card carrying member of the IWW. Actually, I think I have the card like right here, so I'm a wobbly. But I just pay my dues and I haven't been to a meeting. I haven't plugged myself into those sort of things, and but like I'm worried about like, and sometimes when I'm focusing on the here and now and doing like practice of sort, it doesn't matter if like you're a narco-primitivist. I can still have my disagreements about narco-primitivists, and that's another thing, because like even amongst like Cory and Anark and I can like have that discussion. It's like, do we consider a narco-primitivist truly anarchist? I say no, because if we truly want the world that anarcho-primitivists want, go back to hunter-gatherer societies, that's very ableist. Ableism is a coercive, unjustifiable hierarchy, as it were, and so that's why in the now on the street practices, protests, or working towards like leaving or like improving people's material needs, I'll work with narco-primitivists for sure. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree with them or their end goals either.
Yeah, I think like obviously I'm not anti-civ like some anarchists are, but yeah, I wonder, like, when we talk about left unity, like, is it actually like, are we talking about the big tent that we would use if we were trying to, say, start a political party, or are we talking about small union activism or like organizing, or like what are we even talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think so. Like the way that Anark defined his terms earlier, it seems like I think I don't know. I mean, even though I'm very anti-Stalinist, I probably count as some sort of authoritarian, leftist by that definition. And I guess I can. I think so much of this has got to depend on context, right? Which I guess was Janus's point, that like, if it's, whatever, Barcelona in 1936, and people are, you're worried that like potentially you're going to be massacred, by some rival faction, then that's a context in which I could see how you'd have very little to work together on, and maybe in that immediate sense. But I mean, like, it just seems like a lot of these sorts of differences, there are definitely contexts. I mean, even in the here and now, where they're going to come up, like, are you against all electoral action because that's using a hierarchical structure, and that would be a here and now thing where that might be an irreconcilable difference. But I do think a lot of differences about like how people would imagine a future socialist society working, or other things, are going to be pretty distant from anything that people are actually like realistically likely to work together on now. And I would I mean, I guess I'm, yeah, is the question, like, should you have like a big tent like socialist organization, in which case I don't know, maybe like, although big doesn't mean unlimited, right? Or is the question whether you should like collaborate in like campaigns, like sort of activisty things, right? Because then it just seems like, yeah, of course, right? I mean, like what somebody's view is about what how the transition to a post-capitalist society should work, should, I assume, have nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I think this is where I think the most unmapped part of this discussion is us even figuring out what we mean by left unity to begin with, right? And what that actually entails, obviously. I just want to at least interject. I've been organizing since Occupy. I am now part of Cooperation Tulsa, which is part of the Symbiosis Network, which is a communalist group, and I'm part of Scissortail Anarchist Organization. And I've been in quite a few organizations, and I've actually found that these do have more immediate term outcomes. it often really boils down to how people want to structure organizations, what they think reasonable delegation of power and structure of those organizations is. And that ends up being very contentious. It can lead to groups which are either highly ineffective or constantly feuding among themselves. It can also, as far as history has shown, organizations that are structured differently often really can't work together because the way that they are navigating the landscape is like directly in opposition to one another. To really more I guess, because I think you were kind of probing a little bit to see what my perspective on electoral politics was, and I am personally completely done with electoral politics. I did actually in both Bernie campaigns. I was active in both Bernie campaigns because I had not yet abandoned electoral politics at that point. And I had been involved at least to some degree with more local campaigns as well that had taken place in the past. I now believe that method is not a very successful method, especially in a revolutionary sense. And most of the examples that I have studied throughout history demonstrate that, to my satisfaction at least, that it was not a very effective method in a revolutionary sense, especially for anarchists, might I add. Kind of hearkening back to, you mentioned Spain, revolutionary Spain. I actually think one of the biggest mistakes that the anarchists made in Spain in the Civil War, or in the lead up to the Civil War, was electoral politics. It ended up being one of their most dangerous entanglements, which ended up backfiring enormously, which led to a huge split in the CNT-FAI, which led to essentially a bunch of very counterproductive measures being passed in the Republican government. So these examples are material, like they make a difference in the immediate term sense. I would also like to just clarify one more thing, because I know I've kind of rambled a little bit here. That's my tendency.
We're not pressed for time.
Okay, nice.
Because I can ramble too. So go ahead.
And that is, even though I don't think the organizations should cooperate, and I don't think they can cooperate either, that doesn't mean that like that I think that means like anarchists and authoritarian leftists as individuals couldn't get along, or couldn't occupy the same spaces, or couldn't just like, go have a beer together or whatever, right? I don't mean like literally we should be, so completely disunified that we could not be friends or get along. I think that's a different sort of thing. For me, I guess what I'm really referring to is, and this is hopefully also to clarify the question of what I mean by left unity. I don't think that there is a broader strategic program that the two can actually cooperate under. And I think that the only way that a broader strategic program that the two can cooperate under could ever exist is under the conditions that anarchists and libertarian socialists of various kinds essentially bent the knee to authoritarian methods. They would have to become electoralists. They would have to essentially take on vanguard tactics, and they would have to be uncritical of those at the same time. So insofar as that anybody is a principled anarchist or a principled libertarian socialist, they can't do left unity in a strategic sense.
Mm-hmm. I agree there. I want to chime in with a quote from Rudolph Walker, as he wrote in Anarcho-Cynical Theory and Practice. Participation in parliamentary politics has affected the socialist labor movement like a insidious poison. It destroys the belief in the necessity of constructive socialism activity, and worst of all, the impulse to self-help by inoculating people with the ruinous delusion that salvation comes from above. So I'm not saying don't vote, even though I did read that essay on my Twitch channel, at the election, as it were. So I was like, hey, I'm an anarchist. I can't tell other people what to do. And so if that's your drive for activism and improving the world is electoralism, you do you, and I'll do me. I wish I could do more organizing, but I'm working 11-hour days. But any extra money I make, I give to my disabled comrades, and that's how I'm helping to improve the world. So yeah.
Yeah, I just like to kind of jump in here. So, I guess I would, by Anarch's definitions, I guess I would be an authoritarian leftist as a Leninist. So I'm fine with that, whatever. So as an organizer for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the PSL, one of the things is that sort of I have a perspective on this because I used to be a part of the DSA. So I was a DSA organizer. I joined right after Bernie dropped out in 2020, and I was in DSA for a year, and then sort of the pandemic hit, and I was reading a lot, and I just sort of, my orientation pretty much changed. I kind of acknowledged the futility of electoralism. I watched the DNC screw Bernie twice and pretty much realized that like there was no way that was ever going to happen. And even if it did, like the tools of capitalism would not allow him to even be remotely successful in power. Right. So, his presidency would have likely have become something where that would have been a few symbolic victories in terms of like executive orders here and there. But in order to really make transformative change, it would have required, I think, huge congressional majorities in order to make that work. I mean, essentially what he would need to have is like 1932, right? He would need to have some kind of coalition, right? So that was part of it, So, my orientation changed to being Leninist. I do believe in the idea of the principles of democratic centralism and the idea of the vanguard party. But that doesn't mean that we don't have like short-term things that we do or sort of work on together. So, for example, here where I live, in Indiana, we worked on passing a Medicare for All resolution. The city council, the Central Indiana DSA, and the Indianapolis branch, the PSL, we organized and worked together on a big event to get this resolution passed, which the city council did pass, right? We're going to eventually, hopefully, work on another program to hopefully get them to consider the change in the city county budget to reflect real meaningful reforms in the criminal legal system in regards to police funding, because we've seen, nearly a fifth of the Indianapolis city county budget goes to the police, and that continues to go up and up and up, especially with COVID money. So that's one specific like strategic thing that we're trying to do together. And I have very good relationships with folks in my former DSA branch. And so we work together on that. But, I had a very, I think, good and frank conversation with one of my, DSA comrades about sort of our ideological and strategic differences. And they are real, right? So like, the PSL is not a Big Ten organization. We are a cadre organization. We are an organization that trains organizers and for the goal of revolution. We're not interested in the sort of like short term. We're not interested in the sort of like big tent as a means to just sort of get only short term tangible changes. We want long term changes to the structure of society, to move it towards a socialist society. And so, the PSL's general position is that we have run candidates in the past. So we ran Gloria La Riva in 2020, who was going to run with Leonard Peltier, the political prisoner, but he dropped out due to health reasons. But she's run multiple times. And we've had two local candidates. So we had Kathy Rojas in New York, who ran for New York mayor. And we also have Jorge Cortez, who's running for Congress out in California. So we've had those, right? And the PSL's stance generally is that we support those specific candidates because they're our party. But in general, like as a whole, like we're just not particularly interested in electoralism. We think it's a dead end. And personally, I think it's a dead end. I've just watched this sort of the Democratic Party continually capitulate to the extreme right in this country. And the left, or whatever passes as the left in the US Congress, often, kind of ends up being a sort of tepid representation, right? So like AOC's vote on present in the Iron Dome thing, right? Like watching her try to justify that was pretty hard for me. Like it was because I sort of thought that she was a little bit closer to a more of an anti-imperialist stance, right? And that's really the main thing. I mean, that's the big difference, I think, between people of, say, my orientation versus a lot of the people sort of, DSAers or social democrats, is that we're explicitly an anti-imperialist party. And, I find that a lot of times some of the more mainstream left, or whatever passes the midstream left, has pretty crappy track record in terms of imperialism, which is part of the reason we're not particularly interested in some of the electoralism of it. So, So long story short, I mean, in my opinion, like if you look at American history, because that's the context, right? We're thinking about left unity. I'm hoping like in the United States or like in Canada, like we're kind of thinking about it within North America, right? It's not, we can have a broader discussion about whether around the world, but like when you're thinking about context, right? I often think of the 1930s and the Popular Front movements of the 1930s, where you had the US Communist Party, the US Socialist Party, especially the US Communist Party, you know, led by Bill Foster and Ed Browder, who advocated for Roosevelt's reelection in 36 is like a bulwark against fascism, right? So like that's a way in which, you know, there can be some kind of popular front to stop the sort of incursions of fascism in American life or in global politics. That's where I do think there might be meaningful inroads to left unity. But to sort of broaden it out, I also think what's also really important is working class unity, right? So like we as all leftists, we fight for the working class, right? We're interested in seeing the working class's lives materially change for the better. So I think where we can agree on is finding ways to empower the working class and to encourage them to learn more, to get involved and to make difference not only locally, but, you know, to have a position on national issues and international issues. So it's a bit of a long answer, but I figured that we can kind of just pick up from there.
Yeah, it's it seems like everybody's on the same page, but in different ways. Is kind of what I'm getting out of this. Like,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, by the time Anark was done with his last comment, I was like, no, actually, I think you're totally right. I think you know, I mean, like, you know, that there are certainly shades of opinion on the left where you could be in like a broad socialist organization or something, but like, you know, I mean, if some, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, it's like a little bit of a weird context because like the point of the discussion is talk about left unity, not to talk about, you know, whether, you know, electoralism or, you know, what the relationship might be between short-term reforms and creating the possibility for, you know, transition to a post-capitalist society or, you know, hierarchy or any of the rest of these things. Right. But like, you know, basically, I think it's probably not useful, right, for people who have, you know, the views that I have on that to try to be in like broad socialist organizations with people who are, you know, anti-electoral or who would sort of insist on, you know, I don't know, maybe like Anark mentioned something about delegated authority, about like, you know, maybe insist on like sort of, you know, consensus decision-making procedures, which, you know, is something I violently hate. The like every minute of my life that I've spent at a meeting like that is an hour I'm never getting back. You know, I think, you know, and I think that does kind of, you know, go to where we started, right? About how the like sort of unity among a very small group of people is less important than you know, than what your strategy is for reaching out to a large, you know, much larger group of people. And obviously there are very big disagreements on that second part, but I'm not sure, like, I think that it's probably for the sake of the first thing, it's probably not actually worth, you know, sort of rejecting your best judgment about the second thing.
So I guess what I'm going to skip over the second point that I wanted to talk about, which is, are there some topics we can most of us can agree on? Because obviously there are, but is a lack of unity holding us back as a movement, as leftists?
Oh wait, no. Someone else is about to go first.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but feel free to go first.
Because is there a need to be winning? Is there a need to be like a beat down like capitalism? Don't get me wrong, because of my disabled comrades, and then have to like e-bag online. I do have a fiery passion against capitalism. Oh god, I probably not should say anything on Twitch or like YouTube because it's our freak revelation 468 no uncoded messages on the and on open channels. What I want to do if capitalism was a person, as were, it will be in a video game in Fortnite. Yes. But it's where was my point before I decided to make it funny? Damn it, this happens to me all the time. Oh, okay, right. Winning, as it were. I think I'm gonna quote Rocker again. I think I like what he says of why he's an anarchist. He's not an anarchist because anarchism is the final goal. He's an anarchist because there is no final goal. It's just always a constant work in progress, always working to like improve material conditions, fighting against like climate change and imperialism, or fighting against like wars, or help out in your community with your neighbors as we're fighting rent strikes, or fighting against like rent and like doing like eviction protection and that sort of thing, and or like feeding people and feeding the homeless as we're squatting and that sort of thing. And so which we probably already made that point as where that like people can agree on certain things, but like why does there need to be a unity of that as were? So it's just like, I don't know. I'll stop there and then someone else can continue or go on.
Yeah, I personally think that the very concept of left unity is sort of built around a I don't know, maybe an electoral or state-oriented mindset, where what you're really looking for is this mass coalition to vote your politician in, or what you are looking for. Essentially, you're looking for an army, like you're looking for soldiers that will do your bidding. You're looking to erase distinctions. You're looking to flatten the disagreements between people so that they follow. To me, this mindset is deeply opposed to the very things that I'm fighting for, right? And I also find that in a general sense, this concept of left unity is used to quell disagreement. It's used as a way to stop people from arguing with one another. It's used as a way to stop people from criticizing or discussing theoretical disagreements. I'm interested in two topics here, insofar as things we could discuss. And one is I would be interested to know people's opinions on what tactical things we think there could be useful, not coalitions necessarily being built, but what tactical things can we work together on, and what are the limitations of that as well? Because I'd like to note that there are notable examples that people used to think were very good examples of tactical unity that didn't work out so hot. One, for example, being like, anti-fascist Popular Front movements, that has a mixed record on how well that really works out when people unify on that front. And I actually lost my other one. So I guess that's where we'll leave it. I'll just hand it right over to everybody else. Feel free to comment on that. Where do you think we can cooperate?
I'd like to sort of add a little point about what you discussed with the Popular Fronts, because I agree with you. Like, for my day job as a public historian, I did a lot of research on Earl Browder, who ran the Communist Party in the 30s, right? So like the idea of the Popular Front, the sort of support of Roosevelt, was something that did kind of come from the top down. That was from the Comintern, the Third International. And the goal was, again, it was a bulwark against fascism, because they had seen over the few years that Roosevelt had been president, obviously there had been, the businessman's coup, where these CEOs and of these huge corporations tried to basically set up a cabal to take Roosevelt out. And so they sort of saw the goal of the Communist Party, at least in the mid to late 1930s, as a way to sort of be a bulwark against those sort of encroachments. But we do know where the track record is on that, right? In the sense that, we did have the Second World War. And what happened with the sort of the U.S. Communist Party during the early 40s was that, they sort of expanded the idea of the Popular Front, and that led to essentially like supporting, the U.S. war effort, supporting the Allies. So, for someone who is like, an anarchist or whatever, or someone who is interested in sort of non-state solutions or non-hierarchical solutions, that's not sort of ideal, right? So I think that's a healthy point to make. The second thing I'd like to kind of mention too is sort of thinking about, you know, what left unity sort of means to me broadly is just the idea of ways in which people of different political tendencies within the broader sort of left, and I sort of see left in a very broad sense of people who wish to bring on a more equitable and just world, to find ways that we can, you know, reasonably agree with one another to meet some very specific demands, like kind of like I mentioned earlier with the Medicare for All resolution here locally. So that's where I do think there is the possibility of some left unity, in the sense that we're building these sort of coalitions to fight for specific things that will improve people's lives. But I do agree that, like, I'm with Anark on this. Like, I genuinely believe that having like a healthy, robust discussion about what the future actually looks like is something worth having. And I think that left unity as a means to sort of quell that kind of healthy, hearty discussion, I think is not helpful at all.
I mean, even amongst anarchists, we will argue against ourselves, as it were. As I can certainly tell you that, as it were. Or get a bunch of leftists in the room, they'll start arguing already, as it were. It's a stereotype, but it's true.
I was listening to something where it had a clip of Charlie Kirk's America First event, and somebody was saying, the left is a unified front against everything that we believe in, and on the right we constantly fight amongst ourselves. So this is what we're and I just was like, wow, we just really live in different worlds.
I mean, how many variations of leftists are there? Just like how the right complains about how many genders are there. It's like I've seen counts of 400, and some think that's too low. There's more than 400 variations.
Yeah.
Cory brings up an interesting question.
Oh, no.
Please go ahead. Oh, thanks. Cory brings up an interesting question, which I think is something maybe we can have a discussion about in terms of, because thinking about Charlie Kirk thinking about it being the left as being this unified front. Well, clearly when he's talking about the left, he's broadly talking about liberals, right? So like, that's I guess a question that we would have for the group, which is that do liberals count in the broader left? Because to me, they don't.
Yeah.
If, as a counterpoint, I liberals as they stand now, I don't think, you know, I condemn liberals and liberalism, but liberals are such a large group that, you know, we were all liberals at one point when we were younger. I'm guessing, you know, nobody was, unless you're a red baby and raised by, you know, your parents were hardcore leftists. I assuredly wasn't. I understand Anark's criticism of authoritarian groups, the whole soldier sort of mentality, fall in line. And yeah, that can be a really big stumbling block for a lot of organizations, especially if the leadership is not energized. And I see it more as just, we've got these shared goals, we have shared material conditions, and it just makes sense. If we're fighting for the same things, we can do a lot more working together than working against people. And I also agree with Justin. However, I must say I am not the biggest fan of Browder, but I would say my position on Browder is similar to Harry Haywood, but I do greatly appreciate Bill Foster, that's for sure.
I'm with you on that 100%.
That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Yeah, Earl Browder ended up being a bit of a sellout. Bill Foster and John W. Ford and Harry Haywood were definitely and Gus Hall were definitely way more legit than Browder ended up being.
Man,
Definitely.
I really should have boned up on my 1940s CPUSA trivia before this event.
So I thought I was not prepared enough for this debate. It's like, okay, because I also got I've been reading up on Emma Goldman's my dissolution of the Russia, and Alexander Brookman's the Bolshevist myths, that's the word, and so and learning about Nestor Markow and Ukraine, and so yeah, there's because the interesting thing is there were times where it's maybe the left could have been unified, but the Bolshevists, at least, just the Bolshevists specifically, were not in a lot of ways, and there can be discussion about that as it were. But from where, and this is why it's especially for some people that's we need left unity or something like that. If they say Stalin did nothing wrong or Lenin did nothing wrong. No, okay, it's maybe I can work with you today Am I getting preference to? No. Am I going to work for the organization who says Stalin did nothing wrong? No. As an anarchist, no. Because my comrades were thrown into gulags, and no. Also, please carry your heroes. That's part of the reason why I'm an anarchist instead of a Bakuninist, as a Kropotkinist, as it were, because like the reason why we had the word libertarian is because Joseph de Jacques called out Pierre Joseph Proudhon for his like a sexist view on women. So even when someone labels themselves as anarchist, like Proudhon proudly said, and what is property, you can still have some bigoted views, which goes into one of our questions we may touch on to now or later, as it were, of like when is like they know I can't like work with the people when is there's bigotry, as it were. That's where it's like because even in like organizations IMI or like IWW and organizations I think do good work like DSA, there's still because we grew up in a white supremacist, cis allo-patriarchal, ableist, settler, colonialist, imperialist capitalism, internally, and it's very hard to deprogram yourself from this, internally you will still have some biases, as it were, and set some things out, as it were. I just read like a Medium piece, as it were, called Every Rose Has its Thorns, about the reflection in the Black Rose split, of how the Black Rose Federation, many of its members resigned because of like sexism and homophobia, and just race, and just tokenizing their queer folk and their people of color members, as it were, and with the white men being in charge, as it were. So even in anarchist organizations, there can be still that kind of like tensions, as it were. That's why I don't think I'm not going to like definitely strive for that left unity, as it were, because eventually those tensions will come out, as it were. Yeah. So yeah, I yield the floor.
Okay, so I guess we have had a few like there's been a chat going on in various places here, and it seems like I just one earlier I saw like people saying that anarchists are reactionaries. There's discussion about this is why the left can't progress because we can't get along. And so I'm curious, like this seems almost like there is no such thing as left unity. It's just not a reality that can be achieved. So,
I mean, comments like that demonstrate the exact reason, right? I mean, the fact that would be the response to a discussion like this, like, the truth is I have a lot of very critical things to say about PSL, but Justin's been perfectly kind and nice to me and been very polite. And yet, you can see over there in the chat, this is the general tenor of response. If you try to have this discussion, right? Like, this is the way it often turns out. Like and unfortunately, most of the time, it doesn't really turn out as civil as we're having right now, honestly. And to the degree where coming into this discussion, I wasn't sure that it was going to stay civil. I thought it might escalate into an argument, because even in person, it sometimes escalates into an argument. I really don't think any of these issues can be papered over. I think that the only question we have to ask in this situation is what are these tactical things that we can do together? I think, when I opened the floor, I just wanted everybody to kind of comment on that a little bit. But, my perspective is obviously like protests are one of those places, right? Like when you have tens of thousands of people in the street, you're not going to be like carding every person. What organization are you with? Are you here with the right people? I'm not so sure you should, like obviously just nonsense, not going to work out. And historically, in fact, might I add, I'm pretty sectarian overall, but when that has kind of happened, it has had no good effects on the movement. Generally, if you can get lots of people out into the street and the issue is one you all agree to, it's generally better for everybody's goals that take place. I think that's one of those examples. Maybe there are some situations where there's mass movements that are doing more community engagement, where you're going to have people that are authoritarian leftists and libertarian socialists of various kinds will both be in those mass movements to some degree. They'll be in community discussions and stuff. I think those are places where you'll see that there will often be some fruitful tactical coordination. But yeah, I think that, that's really what you're looking at. Even and I kind of wanted this to. I was thinking when I said this, I expected there to be more discussion of anti-fascist resistance. But what I was going to mention is, honestly, that hasn't worked out so hot in a lot of situations either. Like in Spain, it ended up leading to the destruction of the Catalonian communes because they put anti-fascist resistance above all else. And it ended up really just screwing the whole project anyway. Like nothing, they didn't beat Franco. And all that really happened is they sacked the anarchist collectives well before they even lost the war. So it was just a lose-lose situation. Seems to me like what works out a lot better, even in active combat scenarios, is when you have big confederations of militias where each militia is just kind of whatever ideology, and they coordinate through some larger strategic body. I'm using Rojava as an example right now. And Rojava is partially an interesting example because you see there's plurality there, right? They've got militias that are full-on Marxist-Leninist militias, and they've got anarchist militias, and they've got communalist militias, and they've got women's militias, and so on. And the solution for them has actually not been that these militias need to get along. It needs to just be that there's like a broader thing. They stay to themselves. Their ideology acts as it should, and, moves in the direction it desires as per its goals. And there's a broader strategic body they're all confederated under, and that body communicates between them essentially. And that actually looks super effective. I mean, if we're looking at Rojava, it looks pretty damn effective, right? And I would say, that's probably what we should be doing on all scales. We should probably be doing that with our organizations in the interim, well before armed conflict ever takes place. It'd probably just be better that we all develop the organizations as per our lines, and move forward, develop them in the most robust way possible as per our ideological perspective, and move forward with that conception. That's essentially my perspective on it.
Yeah, so like as a Midwesterner, it's like, I don't know, I'm like constitutionally incapable of like being rude, or sometimes like I find it very difficult. But so, because I've heard people tell that to me, and they're like, I've met a lot of MLs and none of them act like you. And I'm like, okay. But anyway, so like, yeah, actually, I find myself in an agreement with Anark quite a bit, in the sense that like, I love the idea of that sort of like, not ideological purity, but an ideological commitment, a sense of discipline, which I think is incredibly important. I'm very okay with the idea of tendencies having their specific lines, and as somebody who has a specific orientation, I fully endorse, like I'm fine with that. And I really like the idea of, having these groups have, deep and fruitful discussions. I'm not that interested in like the sort of comments of somebody saying like, oh, well, if you're an anarchist, you're just a reactionary, or, oh, you're a tanky, so shut the hell up. Like, I'm not terribly interested in any of that. What I'm far more interested in is like, what are those theoretical differences? Why do we have them? And then how can we find meaningful agreement on specific things that matter? And ultimately to me, it's about mobilizing the working class, right? So and sometimes like some methods will work in some contexts and some won't. And ultimately, I think that by people sort of advocating for their specific tendencies, trying their best, doing their best as they can, will sort of, I think, lend itself towards a sort of a rich sort of ideological dialogue between these different groups that will ultimately, I think, end up coming up with better ideas than we would otherwise. So, because I do think there's a certain level of stagnation in the sort of bubble think that can happen often with tendencies. So like, yes, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, but like, I read Trotskyist stuff. Like I read People's World every day. I read Jacobin. I read the World Socialist website. Like I'm constantly interested in what other orientations are having to say about a specific issue or a specific concept. So, I think understanding different tendencies is a good thing, and then understanding your own is of course ideal, but and you can't really get to do that if there's like this like big umbrella where everybody has to sort of like artificially get along, is that you don't get to have those, I think, robust discussions that are worthwhile. So yeah, I think that sense of discipline and sort of, you know, party unity within specific tendencies is a good idea.
I want to jump on to answer, or at least my answer to the what tactical things we can do. I'm an advocate for like a mutual aid, not in that like, oh, the state is failing us, so we got to like help each other out, but because the state will never help us, so we got to like build systems, networks, as it were, to help each other out for when the collapse will happen. I'm personally afraid the collapse is going to happen at some time, whether it be like war or climate change, as it were, or another pandemic or another wave of it, as it were. Unionizing workplaces as much as you can, and again, it's like I won't fault anyone for doing electoralism, because if like things get passed, or like more not terrible fascist people like get into like office, then maybe something like what's happening in Texas for like trans people won't get passed, as it were. Because like, don't get me wrong, I will have my the problems with the Democratic Party as it is. They're conservatives, but they're just slightly better than the fascists of the Thuglicans. But sometimes the Democrats will leave like signing to the bills things that do materially help trans people, as well, like make it easy to get like our gender put on our days correctly, easier to change our like birth certificates, easier to get us access to like Medicare or Medicaid and stuff like that. But I'm not going to settle for like just incremental changes, because once we get $15 an hour, then 25, and of course, eventually fully electric automated gays based on narco-communism, as it were.
That's well said, everybody. Everybody's making great points. Sorry to agree with everyone, but yeah,
you were supposed to save our debate. You were supposed to disagree with us vehemently, so that we had like some kind of oppositional, you know.
It's happened in the chat already. Don't worry.
We need one bomb, man. Well,
Gotcha.
see, this is the other thing too. Like, I was just thinking about this too. Like, this is a highly like controlled setting to a certain extent, right? Like, all of us are trying to put our best selves forward, right? You know, like there are probably things that I would say to my party comrades or like my wife that I'm not going to say to you guys. Like, you know what I mean? Like so there's like a certain honesty, because it's about having a certain level of respect for others. So there's that too. Yeah. So like, I'm just not a bomb thrower, man. But like, if the comment section wants to be that, that's cool. Like, whatever.
We called them, as anarchists, we call Molotov cocktails freedom potions. And I'm the anarchist, so I'm supposed to be the bomb thrower, as it were. But you're right, because I mean, my co-host on Social Justice Alchemy, which is the podcast I'm on, forgot to mention that, let John know hastily comments about like Marxist Leninists, but like again, in my experience, actually, they seem pleasant. But I don't blame any someone on Twitter who says I'm just going to ban people or block people who are MLs, and because that's their own personal thing. Ben,
that's what Twitter is for.
Yeah, that's what Twitter is for. Then that's...
yeah, you want to see the more oppositional form of me? Just go to Twitter. That's where I'm really letting loose. And I'm only half joking.
I mean, I've done my fair share of canceling people, as it were, on Twitter, but no, I have some critiques, and I would try to be measured by critiques of people on Twitter, as it were. But Twitter is also a social media website that is designed for outrage and for profits, as well. So they'll always like bring up outrage right to your in front of your thing, as well, as you're scrolling. So
definitely,
yeah,
definitely. That's the one point I was going to make. You know, social media, while it does have its pluses and sort of, you know, meeting people you never would have met, it can cause a lot of rifts, because, you know, you don't have that human face-to-face connection. And to me, it just comes down a lot to good faith struggle. Like, I disagree with all sorts of people, and sometimes, you know, you get really mad and just you want to stomp. But we just got to remember that we're all animals, we're all emotional, we all have various needs, and it just makes sense for us to, you know, engage critically with a sense of humility, looking at ourselves and, trying to understand where people are coming from, meeting them halfway. And I think this is a great event for doing that sort of thing. I wish this sort of thing would happen more often. Me and Cory, we live up in North Canada, in Saskatchewan, if you've heard of it. And we are like absolutely surrounded by just like the worst right wingers, and like our society is like collapsing. We don't even know like what's going on with COVID because they're not releasing any numbers, and we have liberals fighting amongst themselves, and it's just absolute madness here. And I'm willing to work with anyone if they're willing to help change the system and oppose capitalism. It's gone to that point for me.
If everyone wants to ask, here's the advice. If you're just like Cory or just like Janus in a very rural right-wing things, but want to do groundwork and actions, as it were, and afraid what will they think of you if you're an anarchist, if you just say to all those like right-wingers, I'm a libertarian municipalist, they'll stop listening after libertarian and they'll think that you're cool. I took that from Robert Evans on the It's Happening Here podcast. I gotta give credit where credit is due. Don't want to just like see one words, as it were. Ben, I'll yield the floor again. Ben, you have not been silent for most of this. So you have anything to add to the discussion right now?
Sure. I mean, I think a while ago there was something was raised about liberals, and I think that's actually a useful thing to go back to, since and I mean, a lot of this I think I've been silent because I think my like basic strategic assumptions and stuff are so fundamentally different, than anything that's been mentioned here, that there's really not a lot of, there's not an obvious entry point to even like engage with it for discussion. You'd have to go back too many steps. I'm somebody who thinks that it's the only possible scenario where we're ever going to get out of capitalism is going to start with a whole lot of short-term reforms, to get to the point where you've gotten up to the limits of social democracy, and you have to either go further or lose some of what you've already gotten, and that that the method of getting there, I think involves a whole lot of stuff that I think a whole lot of electoralism, a whole lot of union organizing, but of the sort that I'm sure some people on here would think of as very hierarchical, and and I'm very comfortable with that. So I guess the point about liberals is that as I mean, I hate the libs as much as anybody does. If we're talking about politicians, or pundits, but I think that if we're talking about ordinary people, right? Most people who have any potential to be, to be, appealed to and come into any sort of useful movement, to do anything in the near future, are like at best liberals in terms of their overall worldview, or like at best maybe sort of ambiguously liberal, right? In their ordinary worldview. And I think that this actually does get back to the left unity point, because I think that trying to hammer out a way that you can work together with people who have are anarchists, who who think everything should be done by consensus procedures, and don't like electoralism and all of that stuff, or who are trying to build democratic centralist vanguard party, and people like me, is probably not a great use of anyone's time, because that's you're spending a lot of time trying to like figure out how to navigate things with a group of with like not very many people, right? And like if there was if we were living in a society where like 10% of the population were anarchists or something, then I would certainly feel differently about this, right? I think there would be a strategic imperative to do that. But since I'm not overly concerned with that. And I guess I think that obviously there are things on which you know people are inevitably going to collaborate. Some of the things mentioned earlier, right? Union drives, anti-war protests, whatever. But those are all contexts in which you also inevitably collaborate with a lot of people who are still basically liberals, and I think that's the sort of. So, would you really call that left unity? That feels like a strange word to use to describe that.
That's actually an excellent point, I think.
Yeah. Are liberals, leftists, rarely one of my friends on Facebook says like they hate capitalism too, or have a lot of critiques of capitalism, but they are still liberal. And I'm like, well, if you're anti-capitalist, you're a leftist at the very least, in my book. And he said, don't tell me how I should identify myself. It's like, okay, hey, you're anti-capitalist. So it's like
one thing I would just follow up to submit is that the vast majority of people don't think about politics as much as you do.
Oh, and, yes.
So they have a lot of like political impulses, but they haven't probably cohered together into an internally consistent worldview, because you're a slightly strange person if you've thought about it enough for it to all cohere into an internally consistent worldview, right? Most people have other stuff going on, and that's not what they spend most of their time thinking about.
Right. Like that's kind of that's like the unity in the left, right? Is that we're all kind of like awesome weirdos. Like there's a beauty to that I think is kind of nice.
Again, I'm the guy with the R2D2 bullet and the Sailor Moon like a sweater. So yes, a bunch of weirdos, absolutely, and I embrace that. Also, I have my Sailor Moon leggings. So that's go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, like, and I agree with Ben about this. Like, this is why it's important to like sort of meet people where they are. This is, I think, a very crucial point, regardless of your tendency. Like, if you're organizing for working class people and you're interested in trying to improve their lives, whether it's through mutual aid or it's through some specific piece of like, public policy that you're trying to push forward, articulating that in a clear way that regular people who aren't a part of this understand is immensely helpful, right? So like whether they end up being an anarchist or a democratic socialist or a Marxist Leninist or whatever, like that's fine. But what I'm far more interested in the immediate term is, how can we build that sense of class consciousness? How can we get people to understand just how, like, I mean, they know what deep shit they're in. Most working people and poor people know how truly awful the system is, right? They get that. They kind of get that intrinsically. What they don't get, I think, is the idea that they can change it.
Yes.
And this is the thing that I can't, I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but it's from another, iconic anarchist, David Graeber, who says like, like the biggest lie someone's ever told is that you can't change things. And like, the idea is actually you can, and here's, that these are choices that are made by humans. And I think giving people a sense of agency is what's really important. And so anything that kind of does that, I think is worthwhile. And the other thing I would like to say is the idea of, the limits of left unity is that I think that it does limit a certain level of self-criticism. Within the PSL, we are thoroughly critical of whatever systems or whatever past governments or systems that have been set up that we sort of broadly identify with. We go through deep and detailed analyses about like issues regarding the Soviet Union, the DPRK, Cuba, so on and so forth. Like we're not like going to say like, oh, these are the most amazing places in the world. Like, no, like we sort of acknowledge the some of the successes of those systems and the failures of those systems, and how learning from that history helps us build better systems. So yeah, like I said, I just think to sort of bring it back, I do think meeting people where they are so important, because most people are not like us.
Absolutely. Okay. I love how you mentioned like the DPRK and like Cuba and stuff like that. Okay, how many of you people have like, as the weirdos, to talk to like people about politics, and then once they find out that you're a socialist, they'll immediately ask you about Cuba, China, and USSR, because Did it happen recently, like this week or something like that? It's common, yeah. Rest in power, David Graeber. I love your work. Like, definitely read at least Debt or Bullshit Jobs or Utopia of Rules or Dawn of Everything or Possibilities or Direct Action Iconography. Got David Graeber stuff. Working with liberals. So back to Ben's points, or so I have like done some caucusing for Planned Parenthood, and yes, I met someone who's like, "Oh, I don't talk politics." So like, "Okay, next door then." But in the work in Washington, we live in Washington State. That's a workers' advocacy group that wants like get like salary workers to be like paid overtime, and as it were, or get like the 2 weeks guaranteed for like a shift workers as it were, and so I work with them to like canvass and like do other things in my power to attend protests to do that. But also when I'm like at parties, then I can like interact with people who, yeah, most of them were just like liberals, and like the fact that like they probably had votes each year and or met a politician in person and talked about policies, they're like already in the 10% of the more politically active people, and we're in like the top 0.1% as we're, because we are constantly thinking about that. We are. I work with liberals all the time because like Seattle and all that sort of thing. Even though the Pacific Northwest was founded by like the fascists and the KKK, so that's the whole thing. But I guess like how I do my thing is when conservative liberals, even though it can be very infuriating, I have to resist the urge to say hello, bootlickers, but I will do agitprop, as it were, and be like, maybe, and I have done this inappropriately in other places, like on Twitch, as like there would be rules of no politics, but when someone says like, "How is everyone doing?" Like, "Jonathan, how are you doing?" This is how I answer. I'm still thinking about how still thinking about the best ways to radicalize more people and to join in to dismantle the white supremacist, cis hetero, patriarchal, ableist, settler, colonialist, imperialist capitalism, and the state that upholds the same systems, and to get more people to join in the socialist, communist, anarchist, and workers' revolution. And that has started some arguments, though.
I was about to say that's a hell of an elevator pitch, brother.
Yes. Yes, and I apologize if I'm talking too fast. Several people have like said, "Jonathan, please breathe." I gotta like, if we get to transhumanism and modding, I will need the gills so I can like breathe while talking at the same time.
Yeah, honestly, I found one of the most effective and important vectors for radicalizing people. I mean, obviously, big platforms, the internet, back in Occupy, we loved using the news in order to get messages across. But honestly, just talking with normal people in daily circumstances, like it sounds so mundane or but it ends up being so important. There have been so many circumstances where I'm just like talking to a rando at a bar or something. We're just literally sitting there like drinking a beer, okay? And some sort of, obscure political conversation will come up, or, just an opportunity will come up. And I will just kind of slowly, enter these elements of radicalism into the conversation, such that we end up on these very radical topics. And I think that one thing people need to learn how to do is do that in an organic fashion and actually talk to regular people at the level they're at. And in a general sense, I've always taken the position that if somebody's sitting in a room with me and we're talking face to face, unless they're saying like straight up fascist stuff or something, I'm probably just going to engage with that person in a respectful, honest, open, sincere manner. Regardless of their position, I'm just going to talk with them and explain the way I look at the world in the way that I think that they will understand, that they'll be receptive to. And I got to tell you, I mean, I've met people who years down the road told me that those little 2-3 minute conversations over a beer ended up sending them down a weird research spiral where they started learning about XYZ. And then I meet them like 5 years later and now they're socialists or whatever, And it's like, we have this tendency to only want to think on this big mass scale, but we also need to think about how those interactions that are available to us all the time give us an opportunity to radicalize people. I suppose we've spun off topic a little bit, but liberals are often very receptive, but honestly, often not very receptive. Often they are stuck in what Thought Slime calls the liberal mind prison, right? Like they're like so locked into this one way of viewing the world. They really think of themselves as like the adults in the room, you know, and everybody else is just a silly, naive child. And if you don't think what the adults in the room think, then you're a baby, you know, like you just need to grow up, have your brain destroyed by the failures of the system a few thousand times. And eventually you'll want to triangulate your way to means testing, you know, every program that comes across the table. Often, honestly, it can be really hard to communicate with liberals. It kind of depends on where they're at in this process and how much they're already questioning the capitalist system. I really do think that is one of the main important vectors, is them questioning capitalism. You know, it really is that bridge that takes you from liberalism to leftism. And so if you find that they're a liberal who does not question capitalism at all, it's probably not going to go very far. Your discussion and all your propaganda and whatever, it's probably not going to communicate. But if they're starting to recognize that the capitalist system is insufficient or highly flawed, even there is a vector to communicate with those people, and you have to sometimes be very clever to find it, but it's there.
As I just want to say, I had my head pumped down because, like, oh my god, have been called a bubble-headed, like, naive child, or how many times, or this is what I love. I'm going to communicate with liberals and should try to get better to like get to like their level of understanding. But boy, do like what I talk about seems to go through a liberal prism, as it were, because especially their election, they were all like, vote. Are you going to vote for Biden? Are you going to vote for Biden? It's like, I didn't. I vote for Howie Hawkins because I'm in Washington State because of Electoral College. I was peacocking doing that, saying, no, I'm not going to vote for Biden. I'm going to vote for Howie Hawkins. I should vote for the Socialists as actually on the ticket. But I was like, yeah, vote, because down the ticket, all the other ballots are like initiatives as well. Yeah, vote, but like do direct action, to which like liberals have agreed on it. Like I told C-Shites this for C-Shites friend of mine, he does like bi-weekly askways, but then he also said that like but calling and writing your senators or representatives, that's direct action. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, not saying that's not a good thing to do. It's like, if you believe that they'll listen to you, sure thing. Sure, so my representative won't do that for me. He advocates for affordable housing, and I say free housing, and he also thinks that like Juan Guaido should be the respected leader of Venezuela and pro-Israel. So how am I represented by like Adam Smith and not the guy who wrote Wealth of Nations? But then sometimes, again, this would cause me to go, what's going on here? Because someone said voting is direct action. And I'm like, okay. But I should not be. We should actually have this discussion and not be reliving my past trauma, as it were. It's like. One thing it's kind of cool that Anark like radicalized someone, and 5 years later to turn out to be like a socialist, as it were. That's something I should follow up too, because like I do my agitprop on Facebook, I do like posting some memes and on Twitter as well. So that's some good things. Posting memes of the ACAB or something like that, and Blue Lives Don't Matter and that sort of thing. Even Sonic says Blue Lives Don't Matter, because like one person that said, actually, you know what? Jonathon Scott, you're right about these sort of things. I should follow up and say, okay, so what are you going to do to help change it? That's where are you going to like volunteer for the food bonds or giving food to homeless people that might get you arrested, which that could also radicalize someone. It's like I'm arrested for giving out food. Yeah, you get arrested for that. Or when they go out to a Black Lives Matter protest and get tear gas, that radicalized a lot of people too, as it were. And so that's the way to do it. If you in conversations with people, they start to see your ideas and like do. I should remember to follow up too. Is like and what are you going to do to help about that? The best I do is just like, well, here's Charity League's page and like here help out my comrade if you have the money to do so, or share it on your Facebook post. Every little bit helps, but yeah, I'll yield the floor now.
Muted. Sorry.
Professional streamer.
Yeah, that's right. I think that we're coming up on almost an hour and a half, so we can probably call her a show at this point. Does anybody do you have any closing thoughts before we close it out?
Yes. Don't just post about politics on the internet. Join an organization, please. Wherever you're at. Find the organization that is near you, that has the ideology that is closest to yours, and join them. If that's not good, if that the closeness is not quite close enough, create an organization. Find those people who have your ideology in the place you're in and actually create something that could build power for the people. Whatever that looks like in your circumstances, please do something. Politics is not just having the right opinion on the internet.
Politics is not a team sport, so just because Team Blue isn't doing well right now doesn't just mean that but things are so much better now. Okay, but my friends are still eBay in order to live and stuff like that. My friends get denied on SSI as it were, or SSDI. They still have to work a job that's bad for their mental health or physical health in order to get by and survive. It's mutual aid, help out people when you can, we should also recognize I advocate for organized too. I don't do that much of it, working 11-hour days as it were, and going to come in on Saturday and Sunday too. But some people can't do that. That's a physical thing too. So while I have my criticisms of Twitter itself, mostly not people on Twitter, but Twitter itself. I have criticisms on people on Twitter. I'm not going to tell people to go out there and touch grass because bugs pee and poop and fart in those. 2, I'm allergic to grass, and I burn in the sun, so that's why I don't like summer and not the heat. Oh, climate change. But 3, people are not physically able to do that, as it were. So we got to remember that. I don't know what Janus is, but this looks like 5 white guys on the stream as well, and that should also be mentioned too. I'm not cis though, genderqueer, non-binary man plus a dude. With when I am a man, but when I'm not, I don't know what I am. So there it is. So probably, which is probably why we have a civil conversation here, because it's not life and death for us. We're also all in imperialist countries as well, and so we're not struggling that much to make sure when's our next meal, or am I gonna have a place to sleep tonight, as it were. And so that's why we can have these interesting discussions, debate, which actually I thought was quite fruitful and good. And there was another point I had. Damn it. I yield the floor.
Anyone else have closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for having me. I made the mistake of checking out who all of you were before this and realized that all of your clout is far greater than mine. I barely have a follow. I'm just, a working class dude. So yeah, I feel very honored to be a part of something like this. This is the first time I've been a part of it. So yeah, thanks a bunch, everybody.
Okay, Janus, I'm going to tell you, I'm some random geek on the internet. What kind of lookout do I have? And plus, I don't want to be a clout chaser, as it were. I just want to do my own thing. And, I don't want to gain popularity, because that's kind of I don't like hierarchies. No, just hierarchies, non-corrosive ones. Justin, then Ben. Let's go in order. No, you're
You're
muted.
muted, Justin. Oh no.
There we
There you
go.
go.
Cool. I was
There
trying
you
to
go.
use keyboard shortcuts. They weren't working for me. Sorry about that. Thank you. I just want to thank you all for being here this evening. Cory, thank you so much for organizing this. I think it's really cool that we were able to have this, I think, very fruitful and interesting discussion and be civil. So if that's a form of left unity, then that's one I can get behind. And I really just want to echo Anark's comments about, organize, learn about current struggles where you're at, try to figure out what's the lay of the land where you're at, and, figure out where you can help people, whether it's, trying to stop gentrifiers in your neighborhood or trying to get people, diapers for their kids, or, trying to, stop from some, bad, some increases in police funding. Find ways to do specific things, and then how those fit into your larger sort of ideological orientation, right? Because I believe that, like, whatever individual struggles you're doing, those should always be a springboard for discussions with folks about broader issues, because everything is connected, right? The other thing I would tell people is, educate yourself. I think that, I think we on the left often pride ourselves on doing that, but I think it's important for people to engage with critical texts to kind of figure out where they fit, sort of in terms of their orientation, and listen to others. One source of big political education for me, and I'm not just saying this because Ben's on the show, but I'm going to say this, was the late, great Michael Brooks, who is a big reason why I'm sitting here right now. He's a big reason why I sort of went broadly to the left. I thought he was an incredible person. And I think that his vision of what he sort of called a cosmopolitan left is something to be lauded. And so, find people who inspire you to want to engage critically with the world and to try to make a better place, because ultimately that's what's not only going to be good for others, but it's also going to be very self-rewarding. So again, thank you all very much for organizing this and putting this together.
Well, that was unexpected and beautiful, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
So Ben, that's it. Do you know other final thoughts?
I mean, I guess I just echo what's already been said and say that you should. I think actually here maybe this actually adds something to it. I think a lot of people on the left right now, because we're living in a time and place where there almost isn't a left, by historical standards and global standards, I think make the mistake of not making a distinction between politics and political commentary. That talking about politics is not politics any more than talking about football is football, right? I mean, there's the Skip Bayless would be a good quarterback. There's a like that's so I think that if you actually want to I think that a lot of a lot of the differences that I have with other people here are important things to think about in the long run, and maybe even important in politics right now. But I also think that if you want to change change the world, right, then if you at some point you have to actually log off and and talk to your coworkers and knock on doors and stuff like that. So I don't know, stop watching, don't stop watching this and go do that, and then only come back online every once in a while to read Jacobin, but otherwise do that.
Never. Just kidding.
Oh, self-plug there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Hey, we all shot ourselves in the foot. We have to pick it back up somehow.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I do have like what Justin, a couple things Justin said remind me of things as it were. Don't get me wrong. I love the theory as it were. I try to read it when I can, but I'm dyslexic. Dyslexic of the world, untied, or I'm atheist too. So like I'm a dyslexic atheist. I don't believe in dog, but I have some serious points, not just jokes. That's it. Listen to marginalized people as it were. Black people, indigenous people, Latinx people, which is why I say land back in the chat too. Hashtag land back, because like if we want to fight against these forest fires, how about we talk to the people that like maintained the land well before the white people got here on Turtle Island, and they know how to like manage that. So have that, let's follow their advice on that sort of thing. And again, land back, I will recognize that I'm the Duma washes like land, and that's who is still not recognized by the U.S. government, as it were. So that's something. And so let's not marginalized people, queer people, and black people, as it were. And it's me and Court has been in the atheist community. Sometimes when the community is like complaining about like schisms or splits and something like that, maybe that's a good thing, especially when there's a lot of white dudes in there who have complained about like women speaking or other things like that and various other things. No, don't bring in other topics as well. I'll find. I'm done.
All right. So I guess just quickly, where should people go and find everyone?
I run a YouTube channel called Anark, where I write way too dense video essays that are also way too long. Yet somehow people enjoy that. I don't know how, but I continue doing it nonetheless. And I'm on Twitter under Daniel Baryon, Baryon.
I know I should be brief, but I just remember a fine point. Back to reading. consuming theory. Consuming theory. Some people can't read, but if you can consume theory, like watching Anark's videos or like watching like other YouTube videos, watching this discussion as it were, or like it's not necessarily that important to read because like Big Bill Haywood said, like, I don't need to read Marx because I have the Marxist capitalism on my body. So just find a way to consume theory in the way you can and can do that. And now I'll finally pitch myself as it were. Samurai Geek on Twitter. I'll just post whatever I want. Summer Geek on Twitch, where I do play games and talk about politics because I love talking about politics, and that's where you maybe can consume theory too. Ask me some questions, but I also occasionally read political essays because me reading essays it helps other people who have found it difficult to read. So I'll read those things and I'll repost those like political streams up on my YouTube channel. I should post those things on my YouTube channel. I'm also the co-host of Social Justice Alchemy. It's a podcast and you can find it on all the podcasting apps, but it's also a YouTube channel where it's me and a bunch of other anarchists and leftists just sitting around chatting about like whatever comes to mind. But I'm also the curator of what's really just a Google Doc, charitylinks.page, just charitylinks.page. Charity links is all one word and then .page. It's a bunch of like links to Vimeos and PayPal's and GoFundMe's for people in need who like need to get by. So if you have extra money, check a few of those are there, right? And to charity links that page. Best of all, share it around to like all the socials occasionally to get more eyes on theirs. Janus, go and take it away.
Thank you. You can just find me on Twitter at Daniel Does This, DanielDoesDis. Yeah, good to see another Daniel. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, Justin, you're muted.
There we go. Again, I was trying to do the keystrokes. I should learn my lesson. So, you can find all my stuff at justinclark.org. That's where I have my blog. That's where I have every podcast episode I've done with Cory for Red Reviews and any of my other professional work. I highly recommend, if people are interested in learning a little bit more about my perspective, check out Liberation News, which is the news arm of the PSL, and just pslweb.org. And again, thank you guys for a great conversation, and thanks, Cory, for organizing it.
So I host a show called Give Them an Argument on YouTube and usual podcast places. Already mentioned Jacobin, and you can find all my stuff at my first name and then my last name and then .com.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and thank you all for joining me this evening. I don't know if we accomplished anything, but it was a good chat anyway.
I mean, considering the 180 years discussion, as it were, I would be surprised if we actually did accomplish something, as it were, instead of continuing talking.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It was a good chat. I appreciate everybody here.
Thank you.
Thanks
for
everyone.
having me. Talk to
Thank
you
you
all
very
later.
much. Take care.
Self-care. Practice self-care.
Land back.